Welcome to my channel, The Magic of Java. This is an extract from my second book, The Magic Sugar from Java. It's a novel. It reflects my experience of falling in love with Indonesia and falling in love with an Indonesian lady and slowly recognising that she has been taken from me either through black magic or simple criminality. Or is it simply my descent into madness? Whatever, it's still a novel. Any resemblance to real people is unintentional. But of course it's based on my experience. And yes, it's based on people I know. But amalgamations or caricatures of them. I do mention real celebrities and hope they will forgive me, along with any of my family and friends who believe that they have identified themselves. The way you've been acting lately. Lead in the blood has a half-life of around 40 days, which coincided with Pak Anggabaya's visits to Maua's Coast and our South Jakarta home. Over a year later, Pak Anggabaya contacted Om Cecilio for Made's new number, but Om didn't give it to him. Whilst lead will remain in our organs a little longer than 40 days. 90% of lead is absorbed by our bones and teeth to be released over 20 to 30 years. This release occurs when we are sick, during the menopause and are stressed, which explains why stress seems to increase our symptoms and my mistakes on the internet. But especially during the summer, the symptoms get worse. It has been shown that lead dust particles increase in the summer, but I know that the bones and teeth release lead when it gets warmer. Maybe this is simply due to dehydration, but the effects are predictable. Given that we now know what to look out for and how to treat it, activated carbon, Epsom salts, vitamin C and D, chlorophyll being good, as are garlic, turmeric and coriander, and as I have found, a vegan diet, although beans exacerbated my gout. Ginseng is also of value, hence Pak Anggabaya's concern that we had been prescribed it by the first Pa who studied in Banten. We should be able to cope, although I'm not looking forward to Maua's menopause. Poor Titi may have suffered irreparable damage to her brain and personality, such as dating the pre-man, as her brain is still developing, although the worst effects occur in children under 6. Furthermore, the potential for the heart and kidney disease and dementia are more worrying, and we can all be sure that our lives will have been shortened. Now, chemistry was my worst subject at O-level, so bad that I did no revision, but to avoid an unclassified result, I read some key facts cards on the bus going into the exam. To my amazement, but more so to my teachers, I scraped a pass, as I did in physics, which I loved and had tirelessly revived, ending my pretensions of being a Renaissance man equally at home with science of art. Every kid starts out as a natural-born scientist, and then we beat it out of them. A few trickle through the system with the wonder and enthusiasm for science intact. Carl Sagan. Nevertheless, whilst no chemist, if I need to understand something in chemistry, I can, and Pak Anggabaya had shown to me on many occasions that he was just the same. He certainly knew that he had given to us lead acetate, and this would push us over the top, given the quantities of lead we had already consumed. You see, I believe that for a year, Pak Anggabaya had fed Maua and I lead each time we visited him, and Maua and Titi when they lived with him. I believe he too had ingested some lead, and that was responsible for his breathing problems. He may also have put on lead on objects I touched, as it can be absorbed by the skin, which may explain the many skin problems I have suffered from, which are not obvious symptoms of ingested lead. The Badui sarong is a palpable candidate, but also the obviously fake Roman and Greek coins, and maybe also many of the antiques I bought from him, especially the 25 katekas, penis gourds, he almost forced on me after our first trip to Jimba. So where did Pak Anggabaya get the lead? Well, it's everywhere in Indonesia. Lead weights are used for fishing, lead pellets in air guns, lead batteries are recycled, often illegally. It would be so simple to get hold of it, especially as only small quantities need to be ingested on each occasion to build up to chronic poisoning. But what of the lead acetate? Lead acetate is common in dyeing and finishing agent used in textile production, and therefore, again, very easy to obtain in Indonesia. Some 6 months later, I found that I could readily buy lead acetate online with no questions asked. Indeed, for a kilogram, about the amount Pak Anggabaya gave us, I could buy for just $25. I realise the Western reader is still asking, but why? True, Pak Angga might have believed I was wealthier than I actually am. Also, had he managed to get all my assets from me, it would not have been insubstantial, however far-fetched it might be, disposing of my assets, moving money between countries, etc. In fact, it's exactly this sort of activity that has stymied me for the last 2 years. But Pak Anggabaya, and indeed maybe you the reader, find this hard to believe. Certainly Ibu Dayanti was pushing Pak Anggabaya to do this. And like Mawa is to me, she is around 18 years younger than him, and he is enchanted by her, as I am of Mawa. But again, this hardly explains such an evil act. Could it be because he's a Duke and Santet, and committed to evil and evil acts? Well, maybe. But what all this has taught me, especially the actions of my imbecile of a Dukan brother, is that some Indonesians are quite capable of destroying people's lives and creating immense unhappiness simply because they can. With Mawa and I seemingly so happy and leading what to the outsider seems like perfect lives. As though we have never been touched by sadness, we have target written all over us to those who simply want to create misery. Will we now change? Absolutely not. Being happy and in love is the secret to a good life, although we will probably be a little more careful in future, and certainly never consult a Dukan again. You see, our lives have already been tinged with sadness. We have learned that happiness is an important survival technique. It was only the lead confusing our brains that gave us amnesia. I am also certain that Pak Anggabaya knew exactly the effects of the poison was having on us. After all, he'd witnessed many of Mawa's worst symptoms and knew all about Titi's personality change and breathing problems. He was not only aware of my large poos, but convinced me that this was evidence of black magic by claiming that he too had them. He also colluded in my hallucinations by claiming that he too saw Mawa's mother, Bob and Putri. Then of course realising that I believed Maddie to embody some of Nero Kidal. This had been his trump card in destroying our minds. Maybe worse of all, he observed many of my temper outbursts, counselling me to control my emotions, when all along he knew his administration of poison was responsible for them. Well, that explains our problems over the last 2 years, almost completely. The effects of hypnotism, spirit's possession, stress, etc. I am not completely discounting, seeing them as unimportant, if non-existent, given the overwhelming evidence and effects of lead poisoning. In fact, heavy metal poisoning causes stress effects in almost identical way to mental stress, so the two combine, but this is only dangerous for a prolonged period, which of course chronic poisoning is. But I have suffered since we moved into our home in South Jakarta. Is it possible that I have been suffering from lead poisoning for 5 years? Yes, it is. Of course, everything accumulated that day in Mauer's cost, as it was intended when Pak Anggabaya gave us the lead acetate. So how was the lead getting into my body for some 5 years? As a Brit of nearly 60, I have already significant reservoirs of lead in my bones, from leaded petrol, pipes and paint. In Manchester, our apartment was overlooking the main road. Yes, it was after lead had been banned from the petrol, but there would have been historic lead particles all over the apartment. Then we chose to decorate. When we chose to decorate, we stripped off all the paint on every surface, greatly increasing the amount of lead we breathed in. The apartment itself had lead pipes, and Manchester's water is soft, so the pipes do not have a lining of protective line. But I grew up in one of England's most rural counties. Surely there's no legacy from my childhood. Surprisingly, there is. My mother is from the Stiperstones on the Welsh border, which had been one of the world's biggest producers of lead, so probably has lead reserves in her, which she passed on to me as a baby. Also, surprisingly, Shrewsbury had a major lead smelter at the corner of the quarry by the Augustine Friary, which had contaminated all of the surrounding land. Finally, when I was around 15, I had a Saturday job in a car wash. The cars entered the tunnel in which I worked to emerge cleaned and polished. Of course, the cars kept their motors going, and this was in the days of leaded petrol. I remember one cold winter's day getting hypothermia in this car wash, having been soaked all day. I collapsed on Barker Street, and people who came to help said, "I think she's been drinking." You see, I had long hair and I've always had youthful, even feminine looks. Sums me up really, getting hypothermia in the middle of Shrewsbury and not on the top of Snowdon, and then being mistaken for a drunk. Well, it was nearly Christmas. When I first started visiting Indonesia, I developed a taste for Kretek cigarettes, which over the years became addiction, and I have only recently kicked. But like all cigarettes, they contain so many toxins. Why did my symptoms flare up when I first visited South Jakarta? In common with almost everyone in Indonesia, we rely on groundwater wells for our water supply, although not our drinking water. However, we do shower in groundwater, brush our teeth, take wudu, which involves swirling the water in our mouths, and wash our clothing in groundwater. I say we, but Predate has always used bottled water to brush her teeth and gargle. Groundwater in any city is likely to have high levels of lead, but in the world's second largest metropolis, with no effective environmental controls and an abundance of motor vehicles, Jakarta's is bound to be very high. I also suspect that unofficial battery recycling may be taking place all around our home, enabling lead to get into the groundwater. Indeed, there are still believed to be 71 recyclers still operating in the city. In fact, when we first bought the house, Mauer complained about the water, even claiming that it was giving her skin problems. In 2010, Southwark Crown Court in London found directors of the US company Innospec in Ellesmere Port guilty of paying up to $17 million in bribes to Indonesian government officials and a monopolistic state-owned oil company to continue in adding tetraline lead TEL to petrol, despite it being banned in 2000. Indonesian petrol no longer contains lead, but across the Asia Pacific, 76% of paint contains high levels of lead, well above Western regulatory standards. As a researcher, I recall visiting Innospec and interviewing the directors, who naturally appeared quite normal at the time. I am sure that for the medical profession this is enough evidence, but I remain unconvinced, not least because the symptoms seem to flare up at certain times. Of course, this could be my bones releasing lead at times of stress and other illness, but I still believe the deliberate administration of poisons is to blame. After all, I'm certain that when the imam from the Mashola exchanged my food box for another, this was to poison me. So is it so far-fetched to believe that our mischievous neighbours also had a hand in our poisoning? I am, however, not suggesting a concerted campaign as Pak Anggabaya had embarked on. In fact, there were not so many opportunities to get to what I ingested. I believe that over the 5 years I have ingested many heavy metals and pathogens that have harmed me, which explains the barrage of strange illnesses which have plagued me since moving to South Jakarta. Also, whilst it is clear that Pak Anggabaya had some understanding of what he was doing, I am less certain that the neighbours did. No, in all probability they bought a mysterious liquid from a dukun, having no idea what it really contained, but promised that it had powerful black magic which would make me ill. Maybe the dukun themselves had no idea of the chemicals within the liquid and had simply observed their effects. This is where black magic and criminal poisoning intersect. The actors believe in what they're doing is black magic, but Western forensic science can explain it all through poisoning. So what is the mysterious black magic fluid? Probably no more than water from one of the polluted rivers running into the Java Sea. Although Omuni may have had access to heavy metals which can be used for polishing pearls and gemstones. The Citarum River is the longest and largest river in Java Barat and the third longest river on the island of Java. It supports agriculture, water supply, fishing, hydroelectricity, industry and sewage. Like most of the rivers in Java, it's an open sewer. It is the most polluted river in the world, although it's currently being remediated. Over 2,000 factories contaminate 13,000 kilometres squared of its catchment area with lead, mercury, arsenic and other toxins. The lead contamination is over 1,000 times that permitted for drinking water, affecting over 500,000 people indirectly. 500,000 people and indirectly over 5 million. Recently, the military arranged a fishing competition on the Citarum River to promote environmental awareness and the clean-up efforts. The river had to be stocked with 20 tons of fish, but when a human body was landed, no foul play was suspected. A little after this, it was revealed that the Senitong River in Jakarta, known locally by its Betawi name, Kali Hitam, or Black River, had been covered in black mesh to reduce the smell in the athletes' village for the Asian Games. But lacking public refuse collection and there being a citywide ban on burning garbage, locals began to dispose of their rubbish on top of these nets. Indeed, around 2/3 of septic tank waste is dumped into Jakarta's waterways, often by the companies offering processing services. I later became increasingly concerned that we'd also ingested arsenic, not to the damaging levels which we had led, but enough to cause my skin cancers to flare up. My herpes could be responsible for the reoccurring flu-like symptoms and our breathing difficulties. On checking, I found that I had Mees lines, white bands traversing the width of my nails, and a strong indication of arsenic toxicity. As the nails grow, they move towards the end and finally disappear when trimmed. The Citarum Basin is in the textile finishing region around Bandung, and it flows into the Java Sea east of Bekasi. Paradoxically, this is straight through the new towns and cities east of Bekasi, some of which developers promote as a bucolic utopia. It is therefore contaminating the land where Jakarta's vegetables are grown and the sea where our seafood is caught. Arsenic is even more readily available in Indonesia than lead acetate. Arsenic is used for cleaning a kris every year on the Islamic New Year, Satu Suro, So all Dukan would have arsenic, anyone who dabbles in black magic, and a good many other men, especially if originally from Java. So is it evil to put such polluted water in the food of one's neighbours? To a Westerner, certainly, but not to an Indonesian. You see, many Indonesians will actually drink their daily water from rivers like the Chitram, so giving a bully a little is hardly evil. In fact, to an Indonesian, that so many people drink the water and are seemingly unaffected is the proof that the water itself is not to blame. Just as cigarette smoking only contributes to lung cancer, not causes it, as every Indonesian knows an elderly person who has chain smoked all their lives. I recall the story of a man visiting the doctor with malaria and claiming that it had been sent by black magic. The doctor explained that malaria is spread by mosquitoes, to which the patient replied that he knew that, but who sent me the mosquitoes? You see, the scientific method is somewhat abstract to an Indonesian. Even when you convince them of cause and effect, they will come back to multiple causes and explanations. Now, somebody who falls ill after drinking from the Chitram River or smoking cigarettes is being punished by Allah for sins like adultery or drinking alcohol. So even if those practicing black magic know the effects of what they are doing, they believe they are only hastening Allah's judgment on their victims, not actually causing their illness. So let me hypothesize that Uni is behind my background poisoning. What was the purpose of it? Again, I can point to his desire to take our house from us. Along with piety, he was trying to create paranoia, such as when day after day, piety would sit outside our house, coughing, the painting on our roof, the substance Uni still cleans the ground outside our house with, the sacrifice burung chimani, all are to make us believe that the house is cursed by black magic, and also for potential buyers to believe the same, so that we either abandon our house or sell it to him at a huge discount. Of course, given the depression, confusion and hallucinations that the lead has induced in us, his efforts sent us into complete paranoia, working only too well. But like Pak Anggabaya, this only scratches the surface of his true motivation. He may even believe in the black magic he is using against us. I don't know, but I suspect that he does. I'm also sure that he is frightened of me, and like all Indonesian males, believes in getting the first punch in, although of course it's not a fair punch, it's completely underhand. But no, his real motivation for adding to the devastation of my life is simply because he can. Maybe he is jealous of our apparent happiness. Maybe he really does like Mawa. Who knows? But he is out to harm anyone who lives in our home, because he is able to. It needs no further explanation. When I visited my mother, my Pakistani friend Asif and an Indian shopkeeper on Curry Mile immediately recognised jealousy to be the motivation, despite it being incomprehensible to most Westerners. Having already been undetected in at least 3 murders, Uni is what in the West we would call a serial killer, and is unlikely to stop until incarcerated. Honestly, this is what I have learned, and at last learned to somewhat accept, but of course not to condone. No, I have to keep my distance from such inhumanity, however much it separates me from the people I have chosen to live with. Many readers will be aware of the evil eye which prevails in the Middle East and Eastern Mediterranean. This is simply people being so jealous that they wish misfortune on others. Such is the power of the feelings, it can work. More Messianic Muslims do not consider the evil eye to be black magic, simply a natural phenomenon, but nonetheless haram. It is clear to me from Made's stories, especially of Prama's stroke, that she has very powerful evil eye without realising it or even wanting it. But could there be a further twist to the story of heavy metals? High levels of aluminium have been found in patients with autism and Alzheimer's. Given that it has been hypothesised that Branwell has high band autism, would it also explain so much about me? Is this linked to my aluminium consumption? If this is the case, then has aluminium or other heavy metals reacting with it caused some of my recent problems? It seems to me that I appeared in Indonesia with an existing cocktail of heavy metals, so the additional heavy metals I have ingested exacerbated existing medical conditions I have suffered from. There were the crital windows in our apartment in Manchester, which we stripped and sanded. Should I also mention the flu vaccinations I was given every year in the UK with their cocktail of mercury, aluminium and parts of dead humans? Maybe, maybe not. Least you believe me still to be deranged. Armed with my knowledge on lead poisoning, I was anxious for Titi and sent a text message saying that she should take deactivated carbon, chlorophyll and yellow coconut water. I also said that next time when I visited Jakarta that I should visit her school to explain her problems to the teachers. Not long after this, a manic Titi called her mother. She was horrified that her crazy father was going to embarrass her at her school, and I was forced to back down. Titi told us that she was seeing Prama and Mawa in a house in Pajitan and refused to believe Mawa that these were hallucinations. When I next visited Jakarta, I needed to convince Titi about the poisoning, but how? I approached it slowly, showing her pictures of lead acetate, and she independently came to the same conclusion as I. She is now taking the medication I advised her to, so at least one person believes me, and she was likely to be the most challenging. Eventually Titi decided to repeat her final year at school, something my son Branwell had done, but without really improving his chances. Of course, I begrudge neither of them the opportunity, but once again, it is an expense which I can ill afford, and another addition to the mounting costs of the treachery we have experienced. When Widiati visited us in Gunung Kidul, she joined us on our visit to the hospital in Klaten, where I already had multiple proposals of marriage for her from Tukan Warung at the hospital, but amazingly she wasn't keen to meet them. She did, however, meet the psychiatrist, and I wanted to share my findings on lead poisoning, but Widiati prefixed my speech, saying that I didn't trust doctors and my talk of poison was making Mawa anxious, which it wasn't. She was, in fact, relieved to know what was wrong with her. Of course, my lack of trust in doctors is partly true. I don't trust Indonesian doctors, although I did this one at this hospital. The main difference is that in the UK I rarely go to the doctor, knowing that 9 times out of 10 my body's immune system is enough, and even when there isn't, there are plenty of herbal and lifestyle alternatives. Whereas Widiati, along with most Indonesians, go immediately to the doctor with every runny nose. As one pays for doctors in Indonesia, they're all too happy to indulge, even encourage such hypochondria, running as many expensive tests as they can think of, as in America. This preamble was my demise. The doctor explained that I was suffering from stress following my wife's trauma, and that I needed to calm down and rest, that I should never speak of lead poisoning again, and it wasn't helping my wife. My wife's condition was due to depression caused by family issues, especially problems with TT, and that the hypnotism to gain Mawa's PIN number. Wait, so this lady of science was happy to believe that we had been hypnotised, of which there is some evidence, but not that we had been lead poisoned, of which the evidence is overwhelming. Why? Because I'm a bully and all bullies are liars? Maybe not. You see, Clacton has seen a number of terrorist cells broken up over recent years. I believe that the psychiatrist had been treating some of these terrorists for similar symptoms to Mao's, and she had uncovered that hypnotism is behind their crimes. You cannot blame her for using her knowledge in this way, but a little more recognition of the scientific method might have avoided her incomplete prognosis. But then, of course, my doctor in the UK failed to pick up on my lurid description of poisons flowing through my body. You see, truth is an abstract concept to an Indonesian. To the Western mind, even educated Indonesians' opinions are informed by misinformation and erroneous assumptions learned by rote at school. For example, why do all Indonesians find it incredible that I'm a Muslim when it is their own law which forced me to become one? Even more so that I am a practicing Muslim. But what do they expect me to promise to do something and break the promise? Well, yes, that's exactly what they expect. As without a concept of truth, people tell untruths and break promises all the time in Indonesia. At Tanah Abang, the textile market in Jakarta, there are many stalls providing gifts people bring back from Hajj, including Zam-Zam, which is almost certainly regular bottled water, or worse still, groundwater. People buy these gifts to give to their friends and neighbours to convince them that they have been on Hajj. So not only do Indonesians lie to each other, they even lie to Allah. The very concept of objective truth is fading out of the world. After all, the chances are that all those lies, or at any rate similar lies, will pass into history. George Orwell, looking back on the Spanish War. As a friend of Widate's is a musician and radio presenter. He is infatuated with the music from Manchester and loves speaking to me about Manchester. His favourite story is how Noel Gallagher scammed me out of a Dennis the Menace one night. I was out raving with Mick Joyce. Although I prefer to talk about seeing Pharaoh Saunders in Armstrong Park, New Orleans, and Gene Carn substituting Phyllis Hyman's vocals. I offered to take Widate's friend on my next visit to Manchester, which would be around Ramadan. I even showed him pictures of Rusholme at Eid. Despite presumably being well educated, he was gobsmacked. Gobsmacked that we have Muslims in the UK. Gobsmacked that we celebrate Muslim holidays. Gobsmacked that those celebrations are more elaborate than in Indonesia. And his reaction really does sum up Indonesians. I dare not explain to Indonesians, nor indeed fellow Brits, that there are more practicing Muslims in the UK than there are Christians, as this opens up such an enormous gulf in understanding, however true it may be. Any Indonesian ever read my story, they will by now have asked, why do I keep talking about truth and prejudice in Indonesia? After all, there is prejudice in the West, which seems to suggest that all Muslims are terrorists. Of course there is misinformation and prejudice in the West, but we're not proud of it. We seek to expose misinformation, and when we do, the perpetrators feel ashamed and guilty. You see, in Indonesia, ignorance and misinformation are honoured and respected rather than vilified, with semar mesem being an enduring cultural metaphor. Now this is the big difference between Indonesia and the West. The discovery of truth is prevented more effectively, not by false appearance things present, of which mislead into error, not directly by weakness of reasoning power, but by preconceived opinion, by prejudice. Arthur Schopenhauer, Parangela and Paralimpomenia. My wife, my youngest daughter and I nearly died. We all lost our minds, and my wife may never fully recover. Does this not at least earn me the right to pass judgment on Indonesia? The answer is, of course, no it doesn't. What happened to me is Allah's punishment, so to keep talking about it is to draw attention to my sins and the reason for why I was punished. No one in their right mind draws attention to their sins, so I am a Bulay Gila after all. Herein lies my biggest problem. The lead poisoning has made my behaviour strange for over a year, maybe 5. I have shared with many people my confused theories of what has been happening to us. To all I know, lead poisoning is another in a long list of unbelievable stories I have shared. No one believes me, why should they? But it is important to get to the truth. Not simply because I value the truth, but because how can we be cured if we are treated for the wrong problems? Yes, I am in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Is it my fate to be chained to a bed and forgotten about in some institution in Java? No, it isn't. But it is for people to snigger each time they see me and to force Mawa to take medication and engage in procedures which probably aren't helping her and for which I am paying. Lead has lost me most of my friends and business associates, as effectively as my scheming ex-partner divided me from my family and friends. Of course, this is the cruelest twist. I am a man who has made a living on the power of my intellect, and it has been temporarily snatched from me. Now my reputation is in tatters. Like Ibu and his Danish husband, my fate is to chunter on about lead poisoning with nobody caring to listen. Yes, I really have gone from academic at some of the world's top universities to a successful knowledge-based entrepreneur to a nobody. And it's taken just 2 years of living in Indonesia to achieve this transformation. Lead poisoning really is the cruelest thing to do to anyone. We will be dealing with the problems caused by lead toxicity for the rest of our lives. After all, we fled our home, and in Mawa's case, 3 times. Each home has been turned upside down as those purporting to help us have insisted that we rearrange furniture, place wafak and jimat in particular places without considering the damage to the fabric of the building we live in, but also so much disruption whilst in our state of confusion and suffering memory loss means that important documents and belongings have been misplaced or broken. One such document was the deeds to our home in Gunung Kidul. We can replace it, but we need it to report the police, which will cost us another $400. Or is there another explanation for this? Then further possessions have been lost or broken in moving the 600 kilometres from Jakarta to Gunung Kidul. A Western education encourage us to see the boundaries between good and evil, life and death, sanity and madness as distinct. I have learnt this to be far from true. If anything, they are poles on the same continua. I mean no harm. I simply seek to share my journey with you. Are you, dear reader, ahead of me once more? I have argued that lead pollution is almost certainly a major issue in Indonesia, especially in the cities. I have also argued that the level of tolerance to cruelty and inhumanity is somewhat unique to Indonesia. Possibly in the West we were as cruel, but no more. Is there a causal link? Is lead toxicity to blame for the seeming inhumanity which exists in Indonesia and tolerance towards it? In all probability, yes. I have already argued that despite the incompatibility of international statistics, crime is relatively low in Indonesia. Indeed, based on residents' perceptions, Hardly objective, but easy to measure and compare, it is between Canada and Denmark. We maybe cannot detect a peak in crime, as occurred in the West, despite appearing to be something of a peak in crime, especially violent, right now. Now, if we were to measure social attitudes, I'm sure that we could identify evidence of lead toxicity and its decline. A possible indication of the validity of my theory is the high incidence of gout in Indonesia, a country where diet is only moderately associated with gout. Crispies would certainly be indicted. Prawns, tofu and peanuts are believed to be to blame, but they're only moderately indicted, whereas singkong is believed to reduce the incidence. Isn't lead toxicity a more plausible explanation? Furthermore, the World Health Organization database shows that Indonesia's life expectancy is only 61.7 years. In Southeast Asia, Indonesia is only ahead of Laos, Myanmar and Cambodia. But there is one important indication that I might just be correct, and that is the World Happiness Report, and this shows Indonesia languishing in terms of happiness well below Singapore, Malaysia and Thailand. Of course, there is a correlation with wealth, but not as direct as Indonesian politicians would argue. Why else is Vietnam above Indonesia, and Indonesia only marginally above Somalia? Perhaps surprisingly, it is Indonesia's faith, and particularly Islam, which helps to maintain its position, as providing charity, zakat, whether through donations of money or labour, actually increase happiness. This also clearly shows that smiling, which Indonesians do so well, is different to happiness. There's also some evidence that greed and materialism erase happiness, and I know of no other country as greedy and materialist as Indonesia. Whatever the reasons, be it lead poisoning, wealth and its distribution, or jealousy, the first report should worry Indonesian politicians, as if they cannot claim to make their people happy, how else are we to evaluate them? Of course, it is on tackling the unique problems Indonesia faces, problems which no foreigner could ever fully appreciate. But another indictment of Indonesia's social policies is the high incidence of both malnutrition and obesity. Now, many developing countries have high levels of malnutrition, and many developed countries, especially the UK, have high levels of obesity. Indeed, I recall some 20 years ago being shocked how freshers at Manchester University were just so big. It just happened one year. A similar thing occurred almost overnight in Jakarta. But then obesity seems to occur as an epidemic, as though we are connected to each other, and when one person becomes obese, others follow, as if in sympathy. Some countries have both malnutrition and obesity, but in few countries are the proportions so staggeringly high. In other words, before Indonesia could adequately feed its population succumbed to overindulgence in low-quality processed foods. Interestingly, Indonesia also has the highest rate of schizophrenia in the world. A similar position to health has occurred in transport, long before the country had developed anything like adequate public transport. Virtually everyone had a motorcycle, and around 7% own a car, with 91% of those not owning a car being embarrassed about the fact. This means that to visit a central government office, such as immigration, it would not be possible to go by public transport from Ardesa in Gunung Kidul and back in a day. In fact, our little desa is not served by public transport at all, and the beginning and end of our journey would involve a 1-hour walk. Well, that concludes this chapter from the magic sugar of Java. I do hope you liked it. I'm going to attempt to add another chapter every week. In order for you to be notified about it, please subscribe and hit the bell. In fact, I need subscribers and listeners to reach monetisation. And I do want feedback, but I also want to stay true to my experiences. I really want to keep things real. So therefore, I don't want to alter the format too much. But above all, thank you for listening. Thank you so much.